Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's another Friday, and it's the Friday before school starts for many of us, or maybe a week still to go for some. So thank you for taking an hour of your day to learn some things to help improve our practice for working with students this school year. So it's so nice to see some of you, and just grateful for the time that all of you are contributing to being here. We'll do some introductions and housekeeping and then get started with our guest presenter today, Susan Goldammer from Missouri School Boards Association. Susan, thanks for joining us. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Laura Winter with St. Louis Graduates. And I will be joined today by Ashley June Moore, who's running our chat. You can always post your thoughts and questions in the chat, and Ashley will make sure they get worked into our discussion. And Monica Fleischer, who's helping to take notes today, so thank you to both of them. And a special shout out today to Caitlin Benta of Scholarship Central. It's her birthday, so happy birthday to Caitlin.
Yay!
Yay! Thanks for joining us on your special day.
Of course.
So just housekeeping things to know about. Give yourself and others grace and space. This is an admonition for all of us and everything that we do right now, right? We do the best we can. We'll ask that you keep on mute just so we can hear each other in our workshop. But obviously, if you're presenting, don't put yourself on mute. Join by video if you can, but we also know things are going on in your lives wherever you are, and just do the best you can. We have meeting agreements that we abide by that are online in a Google document. Ashley will share them in the chat, but just so you know, they basically just are things just to be mindful of as we share and talk with one another. So we are recording today's meeting, and we will be posting it on the St. Louis Graduates website early next week, along with the PowerPoint and materials. And Ashley also has a PDF of today's PowerPoint that she'll share with you, because sometimes it's easier just to look at it on your own screen versus the screen share that I'm doing. And there's always an evaluation survey. I know you're thinking, one more thing I have to do. I promise it's short, but if you could please complete it, it will come in your email today while we're meeting. This is the second in our Professional Development Institute series for the 2021 school year. We hope that you will join us for future workshops. Here are some of the ones coming up. We are meeting virtually this year every other Friday at 10 a.m. and we are going to keep them to an hour as best we can, because we recognize there's a lot on everyone's plates right now. So, and just to get us ready and for right now, thought it helpful to just take a moment and do some mindfulness breathing. This is something, those of you who joined us for virtual brown bag lunches in the spring, this is something we were doing together then, and hope some people found helpful, so I'm bringing it back into our PDI workshops for the fall. And I guess August is fall now, isn't it? So 5-finger breathing. The way it works is you hold up your hand, and you just follow your fingers, and you breathe in on the up, and you pause at the fingertip, and then you exhale on the way down. And it basically uses your hand to guide you in doing 5 good deep breaths to just kind of center you and calm you. So we're gonna, hopefully it felt good just to talk with somebody else for just a moment, right? So it's my privilege to welcome our guest presenter today, Susan Goldammer of Missouri School Boards Association. There were lots of questions that you all submitted about legal implications, particularly of advising in a virtual space. And so this is all something we jumped into with both feet, right, in the spring because we had to, but now that we're being more intentional about it with this school year, lots of questions popped up of, am I doing the right thing? What should I be thinking about that maybe I don't even know I don't know? And so Susan has graciously agreed to join us today and share what she knows with all of us. So Susan, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and you just let me know when you need me to advance a slide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's so great to join this group. I have done a little bit of this with the MU branch that went for several years with the College Advising Corps, but this group is St. Louis Graduates is kind of new to me. I am an attorney with the Missouri School Boards Association, and that is a nonprofit association that school districts and charter schools can join. Most, not all, but most have joined MSBA. And we provide policies. We do training for school board members. We do training for district staff. And we have a legal hotline as well. And I always encourage folks, feel free to call. Of course, it might be better for you to talk to your principal first if you have questions. Sometimes if you have questions, many people in the building have questions and they like to funnel it through the administrator, and I'll leave that up to you. But the point is, and I left you my email address there. I should have put my phone number on there too. Forgot to do that. But most school districts, and most likely the districts you are working with, if you are employed by a public school district, are members of the Missouri School Boards Association. Now, I did get your questions. A lot of them are not for a lawyer. They might be for an IT person. They might be for each other as far as learning from each other on how you do things. I do want to encourage you to use the chat box, and it's my understanding someone's going to be monitoring that chat box and is going to interrupt if there's any questions that I should answer right away, or we can save some time at the end as well, although we do have a lot to talk about. So please feel free to put in the chat, but I did try and weed out all of the questions that I could answer for you and provide a little bit of space for some of the others. So let's advance the slide. Electronic communications with students. And I know some school districts are like snowflakes. Some of them are going all virtual. Some of them are doing a hybrid. Some of them are doing half in, half out. Some of them are making districts pick, parents pick, do all virtual, do all in. We work with school districts around the state. The biggest concern that we had with not just counseling, but with virtual environment teaching was concerns about electronic communications with students. And the reality is that we have, as a state, as a country, we have in our school environment people that let's see, do ill to children, predators, groomers, people that groom children for sexual behavior. And until we invent an effective creepometer that we can run everybody through and weed those folks out, our antennas are always up. And in fact, our legislators, several years ago, there was a lot of testimony about this kind of behavior in school, and they passed what's commonly called as the Amy Hester Student Protection Act. One part of that requires every public school district and charter school in the state of Missouri to have a policy on appropriate electronic communications between staff and students to prevent improper communications. So the first thing I would recommend that you do, if you're not aware of your district's policy, figure out what that policy is, find it. If your school district uses MSBA's policy services, that's going to be in policy GBH. Now, there's a lot of stuff in GBH, and it's a subheading of GBH, but that's a good one to review anyway, because that policy is all about staff and student relationships. But if you don't use MSBA's policy, I put on your homework list, let's go looking for that policy and what parameters do I have as an educator in communicating with students electronically. So let's go ahead and advance the slide.
And Susan, just for clarification, what does GBH stand for?
It is just the code, the policy code. So we use a letter code. So GBH and the title is Student and Staff Relations. So if you use MSBA's policy, your school board, and that's another thing, by law, school districts and charter schools are supposed to have a link on their web pages to the board adopted policies. And so they should be easy to find. And indeed, they're easy for parents to find. It seems like the parents find them when they have issues. So check your district's website, look for your district's board approved policies. And keep in mind that even if your district has policy GBH, some of my districts have revised it pretty dramatically. All MSBA does is sends out a sample, and school districts can take it or leave it or rewrite it. And so it's real important. I'm going to talk to you about our standard one, but it's real important for your district to look at your district's policy on this. Okay. For example, MSBA's, oh, go ahead. Nope. Okay. For example, there was a MSBA standard policy puts limitations on the time of communications between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. And that's because we have a lot of folks that have received, for instance, coaches that have received permission to text kids, you know, when to meet the bus and when to put which uniform to wear on such and such a date, or when is practice. But what studies have shown is that kids are sleeping with their phones. And so we don't want to be the cause of children not getting sleep, first of all. And second of all, it is an indicator of, not necessarily, but it is an indicator that an appropriate might not be, in communication might not be appropriate if the communication is happening in the middle of the night. With a lot of these sort of creepy teacher grooming behaviors, the predator acts a lot like the kids, and texts, we're finding an inordinate number of texts between adults and students, or an inordinate number of other types of communications through social media during that time. And so that is one of the little antennas that comes up. If your math teacher is texting you at 2 in the morning, that's something that administrators tend to get worried about. You have to use the platforms provided or approved by the district, and this is key. My educators have been, particularly in the spring, incredibly creative as far as getting out in the virtual environment where they previously were not. But there's a lot of issues regarding student privacy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but if you use the platforms provided by or approved by the district has a greater comfort level, that they can monitor the communications and that it's appropriate, and also that the platform abides by FERPA and other laws that school districts need to abide by. Now, there are some situations where whatever platform or communication tools the district provides you might not meet the needs. And the example that I used is coaches texting. You know, when this law came out, it turns out, I mean, of course, I'm a dinosaur, but when I was in school, of course, we didn't have smartphones, and somehow we managed to have sports. But now coaches assured me that it was not possible to coach without texting, and that's fine. I'm going to leave that to the local school districts, and it's probably true. So the to the local school districts, but the rule is that if you're going to use your personal device, your personal account, your personal cell phone to communicate, you need to get permission from your supervisor to do that so they know what's going on. And you have to notify the parents so that there isn't this parent saying, I don't know why the math teacher is texting my kid in the middle of the night. Though that's when antennas start going up as, is this really appropriate? So as we say, creepy teachers don't get permission, okay? So get permission. And then some schools even have moved away from using personal devices to, there's actually a program where you can type in, but it goes to their device, and that allows the school district to better monitor those communications and feel more comfortable that those communications are appropriate. Okay, so and I know a lot of you are really young. I love working with you. You guys have great connections with the kids, and I know it's just so common in your world to text. But you've got to understand where administrators and school districts are coming from. There isn't a school district in the state that hasn't had to deal with an unfortunate circumstance, and what we want to do is prevent harm of children. And unfortunately, that means that the sort of good teachers, the good counselors have to jump through these hoops so that we can prevent the bad ones getting a hold of the kids. And then obviously, even when you've had permission, if a parent questions your communications, or if your supervisor, be prepared to demonstrate that what you're doing is appropriate and it's part of your job and you're maintaining professional boundaries. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Best advice I can give you, and this is advice for 50-year-olds, it's advice for 21-year-olds, okay? Anybody working not just in school, but in any capacity with kids, be it through Boys and Girls Club, if you're in your church youth organization, if you're working in the Sunday school, if you're working with kids in sports and club sports, etc., you are a mentor, not a friend. And there's a difference to that. I know a lot of you think, oh, but they are my friends. But there is a difference between being a mentor and being a friend, to being an adult mentor who does indeed care about these kids and interacts with them and jokes with them, but you are not the friend, and you have to maintain those professional boundaries. And if you don't understand the difference between that, I'm sure Laura will help you with that. We don't have time to go over that. Use appropriate language at all times. I've unfortunately had to deal with several situations where, in order to, adults feeling like they need to fit in, are using language, that sexual language, curse words, even the N-word, to try and relate with kids. What we're trying to do is teach kids how to relate without using that language. And so we want you to be an adult and to show them how to be an adult. And so that's going to become very important. Spelling and grammar. I mean, I know when you're texting, we've got the little text language going on, but I can't impress upon, it's difficult for education professionals to get parents and others to take us seriously when it appears that we haven't learned what we're teaching the kids. Okay, so please be careful and act like you're being listened to or watched and your communications are being read. The reality is most of them are not, but if you would be embarrassed for the school board to read what you're about to write, then you ought not to be writing it, because the bottom line is that whoever your employer is has the right to see what you're doing and can look at it, although most folks are not going to have time to be monitoring to that level, that is for sure. So let's go on to the next slide. Don't be a creepy counselor, and this is, don't be a creepy anything. And it's unfortunate, but we have, and there's a long list of grooming behaviors. If your district uses policy GBH, please read it thoroughly, because we've done a lot of research on common grooming behaviors. But definitely in the electronic environment, administrators get concerned when you're using platforms that aren't sanctioned by the district, that their supervisor's not aware of. I've had situations where district employees have used fake names, fake accounts to communicate with kids. That definitely gets all the antennas going up. Excessive messages. Sometimes we have 25,000 messages from not an administrator, but a school employee and a student. And certainly that kind of excessive communication, not that if we've got a kid in crisis, of course, we're going to communicate with them often. That is easily explained. But if a parent comes in saying, why exactly is this counselor texting my kid every hour on the hour. That's a concern. The timing of the messages, and obviously the content of the communication. Concerning behaviors are when you spend a lot of time talking about your own personal life, not them, but you. And when you start talking to them more like a friend and less like a mentor. Immature conversations or conversations about sex, and not in a professional capacity, okay? And discussions about future relationships will indeed get you investigated quickly, okay? A lot of questions were like, what platforms can we use, should we use? And I'm just going to let you guys have a heyday in the chat box, okay? I am by far not the world's expert on everything everybody is using. I know there's a lot of Teams. I know that there's a lot of Zooming going on, but I also know that there's several other platforms that are out there that some folks prefer over others, and I am not the expert in this. So I encourage you, if you guys have a platform for communicating with kids, more than one, an app that your district has sanctioned or that you're considering using, to please share that in the chat box for your colleagues here to think about. And we're just going to continue on with the presentation, but you guys have available of all that. Here's the deal, okay? Many districts rushed to go online in the spring. Teachers, counselors, school districts, all about the free. Okay, I know you are. You guys are cheap. We don't, our budgets are getting cut. We love cheap. Gold star for cheap. I myself am quite the bargain shopper myself. However, there is nothing in electronics that is free. Nothing, nothing, nothing. These companies do not do this out of the goodness of their hearts. They are doing what is called data mining. Okay, and they are collecting information that you are using either to make their product better or to sell it to somebody else. And the extent in which they collect and they sell is in the tiny, tiny print that you don't read when you hit the I agree part. And that's why, and even my central offices do a crummy job of this. You guys have some federal laws, most specifically FERPA, that says you cannot share personally identifiable student information with a vendor unless the vendor agrees in writing not to redisclose the information unless they're required to by law, like a subpoena, or they get permission from the parent. And many, many of these free apps are not FERPA compliant, even when they say on their website that they are FERPA compliant. What I tell my districts is don't get your legal advice from the vendor that stands to make money from you if you use their app. You get your legal advice from your district's attorney. Okay, so please be good shoppers and encourage your administrators to be good shoppers. We have to read the fine print on that agree. So do not assume that the, now a lot of these apps do have an education model. And so if you contact them, they have a more locked down version. Okay, but almost all of those lockdown versions cost something because they're not able to mine the data. And so please be mindful, if what you are using is free and you think it's the best thing since sliced bread, that's great, but have somebody at your district approve it and do some homework on it before you start using it. Okay, let's go on. Legal confidentiality. So I got a lot of questions. A lot of folks were like, help us navigate HIPAA. HIPAA does not apply 99% of the time. The HIPAA does not apply in the school environment. Okay, if you are employed by the school district and you are doing counseling, even if you have, you know, a psychology degree, the whole thing, if you are employed by the school district, any records that you receive are subject to FERPA, not HIPAA. HIPAA does not apply. In fact, HIPAA, the law in HIPAA actually says any record that's subject to FERPA is not subject to HIPAA. Okay, now the exception would be we have a lot of schools with school-based clinics. So these are folks that are, we've got healthcare providers that are separate. Hospitals seem to be the primary that are bringing their expertise, their doctors, their care providers into the school environment. They might have an office. In some cases, they're sharing their staff with the school district. Those folks are subject to HIPAA. Okay, they're usually Medicaid providers, and so the records that they collect are HIPAA. If they share it with you, it becomes a FERPA record. So even if a doctor, you know, you're getting notes from a child psychologist that is sent to the school district, as soon as the district receives it, that record that you have in your hands is subject to the FERPA requirements, not HIPAA. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Let's go on. I'm going to give a very brief, because I know we don't have that much time, overview of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Hopefully this is not news to a lot of you, but I know that training under FERPA is sometimes quite sketchy, sometimes very rushed. FERPA is incredibly complicated law. It's too bad that it's as complicated as it is. This is a strings attached law because your district or your educational institution receives federal funds and you're an educational institution, you are subject to FERPA. FERPA applies both to K-12 and also to college institutions. And there's two big rules and a whole bunch of exceptions. Okay, so the rule number one is student education records and information contained in a student education record can only be released with written consent from a parent or an eligible student. So an eligible student is a student who is either 18 or is enrolled in post-secondary education, or in accordance with the FERPA exceptions, and there's a whole bunch of FERPA exceptions, but that's the main rule is you can't release information. So you can't release information to the app company, for example. You can't release information to another student, a different student. You can't release that information to another parent. You can't release that information to the newspaper, etc. Okay, now once again, we've got some exceptions. And then number two is parents and eligible students have the right to inspect records and request amendment of records. And so that comes up in the counseling genre quite a bit because sometimes we have parents that go in and demand to see your counseling notes. Okay. And if you are one of the exceptions, you know, it's not considered an educational record if you are making those notes for your own personal memory aid. But if it's going into the file and it's going to stay in that file, even after you leave, arguably that is not your own personal notes. That becomes an education record. Okay, and a lot of folks don't think about education. It's literally anything the district creates and maintains that's personally identifiable to a kiddo. It can include pictures. It can, you don't even have to use their name if it, as long as they are identifiable. Okay, so that is something that you guys really need to be aware of and think about. Is this just a personal note, memory aid? And Lord knows, I don't know about your computer, but mine is covered with all these sticky notes. Those are memory aids. Okay, I also have this cryptic notepad next to me where I'm taking down notes because my memory is like Swiss cheese. So those are personal memory aids, but think about what other kinds of records you're creating and where you're putting them and who they're for and while you are creating them, and keep in mind that we need to remain professional. I know that occasionally I become too honest and put my own little personal spin. I've had several emails just this week where I've typed up and said, delete, delete, okay? That is a professional skill. Please exercise that, because remember, rule number 2 says parents can come in and demand those education records. And if your district determines that whatever you wrote down is an education record, we've had some uncomfortable scenarios where we've had to turn things over and it didn't make you look very good. And so please keep it professionals. Parents and students must be notified of their FERPA rights annually. So your homework in number 2 is look in the student handbook, or look in, if you can't find it in the student handbook, where is our annual FERPA notice? And in particular, you're going to want to know what the definition of directory information is. So let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. I did not pull all of the FERPA exceptions into this presentation because that's a whole long presentation in and of itself. I picked some of the big ones, okay? You can disclose student records or information contained in a student record to school officials with a legitimate educational interest. So that means that even school staff don't have free reign on what's in a student's education record. Okay, but if they have a legitimate educational interest, they do. So you can share with some staff, you can't share with any staff anything about a kid. Okay, and that extends even to contractors, consultants, or volunteers. If they're performing a function the employee would have to do, they're under the direct control of the district and they agree to not re-disclose the information. So we do have, but school districts get a little loosey-goosey, particular with the volunteers. It's important that we make sure that they understand they have an obligation too to keep things closed and confidential. Okay, next slide. Health or safety emergencies, okay? If a student is suicidal, I don't care if you tell the police or the appropriate agency information that's contained in a student record. If we've got looking at the totality of the circumstances, there's an articulable and significant threat to a kiddo, and it can be that child or other children, we can, in that situation, disclose information. And common situations are we've got a runaway and we need to share with law enforcement, not just the name of the child, but maybe the fact that the child has a psychological disorder, or the child's autistic, or, you know, there's lots of different examples this would fall under. Okay, so that doesn't mean if we've got a health or safety emergency, we get our bullhorn out and just spread all over. We still need to be intelligent about it, but there is some leeway in that, and that's a good thing. Next one. Directory information. You cannot run a school without directory information, okay? So school districts can, and they should, identify certain information that they don't think is harmful or an invasion of privacy if disclosed to the community. Okay, now it's a double-edged sword. Information is either confidential or it is not. Okay, and I think we get in our head, well, it's okay if we share it with the PTA because the PTA, everyone knows there's no creeps in the PTA. No, I have no clue how many creeps are in the PTA. Okay, so school districts have to make this determination on what they think is okay to share and what is not. And it's used directory information, but it's actually, it doesn't have to be like a phone directory, but typical things are in there are the name, the address, the grade level, the photograph, dates of attendance, honors and awards. Think about stuff that's in the yearbook. I mean, the school district doesn't get written permission from each parent to disclose stuff that's in the yearbook or that's in the music program. Or think about, a lot of counselors will have bulletin boards where they, you know, brag about kids that got admitted to certain colleges or that got scholarships. And when you put that up, you're disclosing information contained in a student's educational record. Well, how is that legal? Are you getting written permission for parents to do that? Of course you're not. Well, the reason is, hopefully, your district has notified the parents that you're going to disclose this information without their consent unless they opt out. So it becomes important. So the third thing on your homework list is figure out, and usually districts put this in their handbook and they say, you know, if you want to opt out, let us know by such and such a date. Figure out if anyone's opted out. All right. Now keep in mind photographs. I mean, we've had a lot of districts that really have pushed towards social media, and they're using Jodo or Dodo, I forget the name of that thing, and they're using Facebook, and they're trying to put pictures up of kids. When you take a picture as part of your job for kids and you display it, you're creating a record under FERPA. And now you're disclosing it, and you want to make sure that the parents feel comfortable with you doing that. Okay. Now, in addition to directory information, I have a lot of school districts, you know, parents are kind of interesting. They're okay if the picture's in the yearbook, but if you put it on a web page, they freak out. So some districts have an additional layer. It's not required. Under FERPA is fine. Okay. If you say we're going to disclose your picture unless you opt out and the parent doesn't opt out, legally you're okay. But from a public relations perspective, some districts have another layer, and that's a media release, where parents agree specifically that you can use the image of their child on your web page or in district publications and those kinds of things. So there's an additional sort of layer there that may or may not exist in your district. It's up to you to determine that. Okay. Transfer and enrollment, you can disclose to officials of another school or school system or a college where a student seeks to enroll or has enrolled for purpose of enrollment or transfer. So ironically, you don't, if the district notifies parents, okay, and your annual notice that if, you know, we know that your kid has applied to this school and this school has asked for a transcript, we can just send that transcript. A lot of districts want the written signature of the parent, but it's not required. And I know a lot of you work with a lot of at-risk kids. And sometimes the parent is the barrier for these kids to get into college. So there are some exceptions, and that's one you probably need to know about. Let's go to the next one. Financial aid is another one. You can disclose without written parental permission if the disclosure is in connection with financial aid. Okay, next one.
Actually, can you just elaborate on that one? Because that's, I know in my space has come up quite a bit. So
okay, if you know that the student has applied for or received, and you need to, the kid needs to provide, the school district needs to provide to, and I don't, it can be anything from financial aid through the college. I think it's broad enough to include like scholarship kinds of things as well. If information from the district is necessary to determine if the student is eligible, or to determine the amount of aid that the kid is eligible for. So obviously, if a child has been determined to be homeless, some places give additional aid for kids that fall into that category, but disclosing that a child's been labeled as homeless or qualifies under McKinney-Vento is disclosing information contained from a student record, right? Or disclosing that a student is eligible for free and reduced lunch is disclosing information contained in a student record. Conditions of the aid or enforced terms and conditions of the aid. You are allowed under FERPA to disclose information without written parental consent. Now, obviously, some parents get very nervous, and so we want to work with parents to the extent that we can, all right? I don't think we should ever have a system where we circumvent parents, but I also know that many on this call deal with a lot of kids who are in at-risk situations, might not even be living with their parents, and this might be a barrier to these kids getting to go on to post-secondary, and I just want you to know there are some conditions in the law that would allow for you to disclose information legally in these narrow circumstances.
thank you. And Susan, just so you know, we've got about 10 more minutes, including questions. So
Oh goodness, we better roll. Okay, let's roll. I'm talking too much. A lot of you asked, can we, most of you are worried about the confidentiality bit. Can I counsel kids one-on-one on Zoom? And the answer is, yeah, that's no different than you counseling kids one-on-one in your office, okay? It doesn't violate FERPA. I mean, one of the questions is, what are you discussing with students virtually? And in the discussions I've had with folks, the main concern they seem to think, and let me know if that's not your concern, is that you don't know who else is in the room with the student on the other end. And that's true, but a lot of times you don't know who's listening through the door in your office either, and yet we seem to manage to make that happen. Okay, so there are things we can do to minimize a breach of confidentiality, but it's not really a legal issue. Unless you're discussing information that's contained in a student record, which is narrow, and a lot of times you're not. You're just talking about the kids' feelings or how they're doing that day, but maybe you are. Maybe you're talking about their grades, for example, or their discipline record. Okay, so if you're not talking about information contained in a student record, it's no problem whatsoever, no legal problem at any rate. I know that a lot of you are saying, wait a minute, we don't know if the student's being honest, we don't know if their stepfather with a stick is around the back door. I get that, but you're not breaking the law by doing that. It could be a problem if you're discussing things contained in a student record and maybe the next door neighbor's overhearing it. That could be a FERPA violation, but you know, you can minimize that by talking to the kid and saying, listen, I want to talk to you about some sensitive stuff. Can you go to a space where it's just you or you and your parents? Because remember, the parents get to see this stuff too. So it shouldn't be a problem in that regard. I think what a lot of folks and a lot of administrators and a lot of attorneys are worried about is that suddenly we've increased this electronic communication, and is that going to increase opportunities for these sort of creepy teacher counselors to prey on kids? And that is perhaps correct. Okay, that doesn't mean that it's illegal for you to have a conversation one-on-one with the kid, but I do know that there are a lot of school districts that, because they are very nervous about grooming, are asking or requiring or thinking about having districts record your conversations with kids so that you can prove that whatever you talked to was appropriate, or they can prove, if a parent comes forward, that your communications were appropriate. That's not required by law. And in fact, I have been discouraging it, because if you record it, now you've got a FERPA record. You got yet another student educational record with a personally identifiable that has to be maintained, etc. I would prefer that you use different methods of minimizing that. I've had some principals say, okay, I'm not going to require recording, but everyone needs to know I can and will Zoom bomb. I will peek in just like I would in an office setting, maybe stick my head in the door and make sure that things are appropriate. But that is ultimately up to your administrative staff. Some folks, the Missouri Counseling Association, actually, when we first came out with our pandemic guidance, came out with some suggestions, and I've encapsulated a few, but I've also provided Laura a document that they wrote very quickly for us in the spring that I've asked her to share with you on just kind of getting ready for the virtual space. Let's go on to the next slide. Should you record? That's up to you and your administrators. My biggest issue is I don't want to create more FERPA records, but if you feel that it will protect you, or if your administrator would feel better about the whole grooming thing. But once again, you've got to talk about the kinds of counseling that you do, because you know, one of the questions is, do I have to tell them I'm recording? Legally, you don't. In the state of Missouri, you can record a conversation. You know, if there's a conversation between two people, only one person has to consent. But here's the deal, it's creepy. And, you know, it just is, it's not a legal issue, it's a creepy issue. I can't tell you how many calls I get where teachers are offended when they call a parent and the parent is secretly recording that conversation. And so I can't envision that that's the kind of relationship you want to have with the kids. And so I would tell them that they're recording. You don't need a student's permission to record. I have, if you use district policy, check your district's policy. If you use MSBA's policy, it's policy KKB, and that deals with when we can record parents and students. and when they can record us. And the whole reason this policy exists is because it's creepy. And we want to be upfront. We want our parents to be upfront to us. We want to be upfront to them. So check and see if your district has this policy or a different policy regarding recording. And then it's really unclear. Most records we maintain in accordance with the in accordance with the Secretary of State's retention manual. There is nothing on these kinds of things in Secretary of State's retention manual. So it's really up to the local district on how long they think these recordings need to be kept and how they are kept. I can tell you right now that the Zoom cloud is not FERPA compliant. Okay, and so if you guys do record using Zoom, it needs to be on a district server. Okay, and there's ways that that can be set up, but please look into that. Okay, next, and Laura, you're just going to cut me off because I talk a lot. Okay, another law that I think is important for you, it didn't come up, but a lot of districts forget about it or have never been trained on it. This is another federal law. It's called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. It's been around for forever. I think it gets violated a lot. And I just want to put this on your radar. If a school district or an employee of a school district surveys or tries to do an analysis or an evaluation of a student on one of these categories, you have to notify parents and in some cases get written consent. Now let's look at this. Political affiliations or beliefs, good Lord, it is an election year. Stay away from that, okay? We don't want to know what our family's political beliefs are. But look at the next few: mental or psychological problems, sex behavior or attitudes, illegal, antisocial, self-incriminating or demeaning behavior, critical appraisals of students' families. I know a lot of districts are really focusing on the social and emotional, and they want to know how kids are doing. And I know that a lot of districts have done things like have done surveys about drug and alcohol use, and they've done surveys about sexual behavior of kids. It's not that it can't happen, but you have to jump through. If you're going to do a survey or an analysis of kids based on these criteria, let's go to the next slide. What you have to do depends on how it's funded. If it's funded through the U.S. Department of Education, like through Title IX money or some of this COVID money, you have to notify parents and you have to get written consent from the parents prior to the survey. And if it's funded in other ways, district money, some districts partner with community organizations, you still have to notify parents and give them an opportunity to opt out. Now, a wonderful opportunity to do that is at enrollment in the handbook, okay? But you have to give the parent some kind of notice that, yes, we do a drug survey, or we're going to do some social and surveying of our students. And under the PPRA, we've got to let you know, and you have an opportunity to opt out, and you need to let us know by such and such a date. Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
Susan, actually, I'm going to pause there. I think I just want to make sure there's questions in the chat. I don't know if that's the case, or if people have questions that we get a chance to bring them into the room. And maybe then if there's anything that's in the additional slides that we definitely need to bring into the room, we can do that too. Ashley, Is there anybody who had a question in the chat?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. So one, there's a practitioner who says that they go in separate from the school as an outside source. So wondering if they would fall under HIPAA or FERPA.
They're going to be most likely they're going to be HIPAA. Okay, I would need to know about their relationship, but if they are a medical provider, which chances are they actually provide behavioral health services or mental health services, and I've got a lot of districts that are doing great things with school-based health, and that's great. But if they are an outside provider that's just being provided space in the school and under contract with the school, but they are separate, they are most likely covered under HIPAA.
Okay, she said that they're an educational funding provider.
I don't know what that means. I might need a little bit more detail. So they have them contact me and we can talk.
Of course. Yeah, another question about screen sharing for financial aid information. So basically wondering, is that Okay, so if students and parents are working through financial aid and there's a screen share happening, where does that fall in the things that we've been discussing today?
You might have to explain to me more what you mean by screen share. Like you're on Zoom with the parent and the student working through
Through their
well,
financial aid information.
well, if it's just between you and the parent and the student, well, they get to know. I mean, your educational records, they get to know. I mean, it's not disclosing outside the bubble, so to speak. It's not a FERPA violation to talk parents and students through the FAFSA or to share information the school district has with parents and students. What becomes a FERPA issue is what if you're screen sharing not just with the parents and the students, but the college? So now we're releasing information to the college. Okay, well, one easy is just get parent written consent to do it. And then no problem. Or if the student's 18, get their written consent to do it. But that FERPA exception will come into play most likely when the parent's not involved for whatever reason. And so we can't, or the parent for whatever reason isn't responsive when we try and get written consent. And the college needs some information about the student in order to secure the financial aid. That's the point that's the purpose of that.
Okay.
Does that help?
And then it does. And then the last question I see with regard to the PPRA and the topics that can't be surveyed, does that apply to note-taking for advising students as well? Or is it just the survey?
No, it's just, one-on-one conversations about kids, it's not a problem. But if you start doing a more formal survey or analysis, and this usually is like many kids. I know that sometimes we do screening for suicide. We have concerns, we've got kind of some screening things. That's not considered usually a survey or an analysis, although those terms have not been defined by the U.S. Department of Ed, I might add. But I think the concern when this was passed many decades ago was that schools were getting too nosy. And parents were upset about schools getting nosy. And so we have to kind of let parents know what kind of this confidential, it's not that we can't do it, we can, but you got to jump through these hoops of notifying parents on these particular sensitive topics.
Great.
Good.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think we are going to cut it there just because we promised we would wrap up within an hour. There are some additional slides and information in Susan's PowerPoint that I will send out to everyone early next week and post on our website. We didn't have any announcements to share today, but if you ever have things you'd like to share with others, please let me know. We're happy to have you bring that into the space. I've included here lots of links for amazing resources that the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis has put together that I think you'll find truly valuable. And just a reminder that we still have a COVID-19 resource page on our website that I am updating as I get updates from the Department of Higher Education or the testing associations or others. And that kind of brings us to the end. So just to do a quick checkout, if you want, just type one word in the chat about how you're feeling after today's workshop, or if you have lingering questions, I'm happy to pass them on to Susan, but of course, we've also shared her contact information. You may contact her directly. You should have received an email with a link to a short evaluation survey. I promise it's short, but really helpful to us. And we're about to start school. So just know everything that you've learned and every experience you've had up until now has prepared you for this. And we'll all go into this with our best attitudes and our best skills and do the best that we can. So just a reminder, we're thinking about you. We're your biggest fans and we are supporting you. So stay safe and stay well and have a great start to your year. We'll see you again in a couple weeks.
Keep your sense of humor.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
How did it go? Because I missed it.
It was all right. I think by seeing the power.